Greetings, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all to this webinar hosted by the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, also called the North Central CASC, which is based at the University of Colorado Boulder. I am Imtiaz Rangwala, Climate Science Lead at the North Central CASC, co-hosting this webinar with my colleague, Heather Yoakum, who is our Social Science Lead. We bring you these webinars to facilitate a discussion of science, research, and best practices related to adaptation and resource management under a rapidly changing climate, with a focus on the North Central US that encompasses the Missouri and the Upper Colorado River basins. Before I introduce our wonderful speakers, a quick word on housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, and you can find all our webinar recordings on our website. During the webinar, all participants will be muted, but you'll have the ability to unmute during the Q&A period at the end. We, however, encourage you to put your questions and comments in the chat box anytime during the webinar, and we will start with those questions first during the Q&A in the order they are received. We will end the formal part of this webinar at noon Mountain Time and stop the recording at that point. After that, anyone who wishes to stay on to engage in a more informal conversation with our speakers is encouraged to do so. And now it is a great honor and excitement for me to introduce our speakers for today. First we have Phil Two Eagle, who is the Executive Director of the Sicangu Lakota Treaty Council in Rosebud, South Dakota. Mr. Two Eagle has been working on preserving the inherent rights and treaty rights of the Sicangu Lakota Oyate, which is the Rosebud Sioux tribe. He believes in preserving his Lakota language, as he recognizes language as the source of inherent sovereignty and a connection to the ancestors. Mr. Two Eagle works with the elders and spiritual leaders, traditional knowledge, treaty rights, Lakota language, climate crisis, and the environment, and with the Oceti Sakowin Oyate, which are the 7 council fires of the Lakota, Dakota, and the Nakota people, in order to have the US federal government honor the Fort Laramie treaties that is signed with the Lakota people. He believes in the Tiwahe, the family unit, as the first form of Lakota traditional government, and that life teachings begin with the Tiwahe. Mr. Two Eagle wants the Oyate to return to the Tiwahe and to begin the process of healing. His work leads him to build an indigenous economy together to return to the circle. Next, we have Paula Antoine, who is the director of the Sicangu Oyate Land Office and a member of the Sicangu Climate Crisis Working Group. As a lifelong protector and supporter of the Unchimaka, the Grandmother Earth, and her land, people, and resources through engagement in legislative and associate activities, including cultural and traditional aspects. She hopes to ensure the culture and traditions of the Lakota Nation will continue to help her people to live in these challenging times. And lastly, we have Robin O'Malley, who had a long career in government and nonprofit doing conservation work and has recently retired in 2020. He currently works for the Sicangu Lakota in developing a climate adaptation plan and implementing a Sicangu Climate Center to manage the community's data and information and to use it to strengthen their community and sovereignty. He also advises the Bureau of Land Management on the identification and use of climate science and information as a pro bono activity. Prior to retiring from the USGS, Robin directed the North Central CASC and served as the policy and partnership coordinator during the development of the CASC network. He directed the production of the State of the Nation's Ecosystems while at the John H. Heinz III Center for Science, Economics, and the Environment. He has served as the Chief of State at the National Biological Survey, Deputy Science Advisor to Interior Secretary Babbitt, Associate Director for Natural Resources at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, Environmental Advisor to Governor Thomas H. Keane in New Jersey, and had several positions in the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. He has a master's from Harvard Kennedy School and a bachelor's from the State University of New York. The talk today is titled Building a Climate Adaptation Plan for the Sicangu Lakota. I greatly thank our presenters for being here today and sharing this story. And with that, I'll ask Robin to please take it away.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us for this. I did retire 3 years ago, although sometimes it doesn't feel like it. But it's good to be back working with the folks at the CASC. And much of this work happened in a remarkable way. We started just as COVID was building, and we did most of the work involved and presented in this plan remotely, which I think, well, not I think, it made it very much more difficult and hindered us, but I think we worked well around it, and we managed around that challenge. This plan also started with science from this center. Imtiaz and Laura Edwards were both advisors and gave the Sicangu Climate Crisis Working Group a really good background in the science and what it is we know and what might be facing folks. And so that really forms the heart of the understanding behind this. It also started with connections from the center. James Rattlingleaf is a PI at the center, has been a colleague for a number of years, and is also a member of the Sicangu Climate Crisis Working Group. And it was through James's intervention that we learned about this opportunity and managed to pull it together. And as I'll say a little bit more about at the end, we're continuing to work on this. The plan is in place, but we're moving ahead with some interesting follow-on work. So let me start here and figure out why I'm not moving my slides. Okay, so these 4 slides are directly from the report and are the kind of background that Imtiaz and Laura brought to us. So no surprise, there's a temperature increase across the period of record for the Rosebud area. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong direction. And there's also been an increase in rain and snow. And in fact, we had several interviews with elders as part of this process. And several of them spoke of recalling really terrible snowstorms and blizzards that really knocked the community on its back. People having to burn their furniture for heat, that sort of thing. Well, we saw that again this winter with successive snowstorms, people isolated, and so it was this kind of information that was reflected in the actual scientific record. Another set of statistics that you kind of can't argue with. It's getting hotter, and it's going to get a lot hotter. So we presented this kind of information and then started to try to put it into context and make a little bit more of, well, what's really going to happen. So this is the projection of temperature. It's interesting to note that the Rosebud area has already heated more than the global average. So they're already feeling heavier effects than many of us. But we tried to translate that into things that were pretty understandable. So days with high fire danger is a real, that's a trigger point for certain kinds of actions, but it's an indication of the kind of impacts that may come. And the other one that I'm particularly interested in is the fact that precipitation increases will change the vegetation. And I've seen places where tree cover is dying because of increased precipitation. And what we have as a very preliminary indication is that there may be more shrubland in the Rosebud landscape in the coming decades. So this was the kind of taking the science from the very basic modeled future to try to make some, bring this to life and give people a sense of what it might mean in their daily lives. And I'm going to turn it to Phil now to speak a little bit more directly about the background.
Bill, we cannot hear you.
Phil, we can't hear you. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mitake Piyuha Chante Washtia Napio Choose Papalo. My relatives, I shake your hands with a good heart today. August 6, 2019, I sat down with the president of the Rosebud Sioux tribe at that time because we've been very concerned about the climate and global warming for a long time. And he authorized me to form this is the creation of the Sicangu Climate Crisis Working Group. Next slide. So with that, you'll see the tribal program managers, directors that started this process.
I'm having a hard time, folks. My slides are not, there we go, sorry.
So this project is based on some things. One is traditional knowledge. So here's the what's in our Climate Adaptation Plan. And in 1878, the Sicangu band settled at what was to be their final agency at Rosebud Creek, located at present-day Rosebud, South Dakota. It was the Thunder Beings who guided the holy man to the Makizita, is the White River, or the Smoky Earth River Valley, and because of the abundance of spring water. The Little White River Valley is understood to be the Wizipam, the buffalo hide container used to store the necessities of life. This environmental Wizipam ecosystem contains water and aquatic life, plants for food and medicine, wildlife, and winged and forest for wood and shelter. It is held in the same high regard as the Black Hills and sacred sites and unmarked burials. So you have to remember that according to the Lakota traditional knowledge, we work with what we call the Sicangu Oyate, is the Thunder Beings. Next slide. According to our history, this is prior to the arrival of the Europeans. This is the area of the Ocheti Shakone, which is the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. It goes all the way into Canada and then to the Carolinas. And our headquarters is always the Black Hills. So this is a map was based on where our people have been. It's important to note that our people moved around because of the climate and also because of the buffalo. This is the map from William T. Hornady in 1889. It shows the extermination of the buffalo. Next slide. This is the image of the when the United States government came to Fort Laramie, Wyoming, and to sit down with our chiefs. It was our chiefs that secured our future from this day forward. They secured a nation-to-nation treaty with the United States of America. And then from that day forward, we've been trying to get the United States to honor the treaties they signed with us. Next slide. So the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 was one of the first treaties. Later on, I'll show you a map of the boundaries for the treaty boundaries for 1851. Article 6 of the Fort Laramie Treaty states that the parties to the second part of this treaty, having selected principal chiefs or head chiefs for their respective nations, through whom all national business will hereafter be conducted, do hereby bind themselves to the sustained said chiefs and their successors during good behavior. Yeah, you have to remember that it was the chiefs that signed the treaties, and their successors are the treaty councils. Article 2, 1868. All existing reservations of the east bank, it should be of said river, shall be the same as set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians here named. No one should be permitted to enter on our treaty territory. This is what's important to me, that even though the treaty states that, the United States began violating the treaties. And this is the description of the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, and it describes our boundaries. It goes from the Missouri River to the Missouri River. Next slide. We also worked with one of our elders, Victor Duville, his professor emeritus at Sicangu University. This is one of the creation stories, and there's many that we have that eventually we'll be relying on. The making of Machimaka, and which is grandmother earth, and Machpia Shkan water. In the beginning, there was nothing except for Ian, rock, wrapped in the deepest Ha, which is darkness. Ian had great spiritual powers, especially in his blue-colored blood, but he longed for companionship. He let his blue blood flow from him to create Makha, earth. And as he watched his blood flow out to the ends of the earth, he called to Machpia Tchoshkan, the blue mover. As his powers flowed out, Ian became an eerie stand of molten rock called Tchunka. And when the humans were created from what was left, they called this Tchonkashila, grandfather. Tchonkashila is the oldest thing known to humans, and this term was appropriate. The humans called Unchimaka, grandmother, the next oldest thing, and this was appropriate. The act of creating Unchimaka Machpiat Khoshka is called Iyankaga. So in the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, you'll see the original boundaries. The other tribes are also included in this map. The Ochete Shakoni territory, as you can see at the bottom right corner there, where it says Lincoln, that's Lincoln, Nebraska. And our treaty boundaries takes us to the east bank of the Missouri River. Somewhere along the line, you have to remember there was no maps written at the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty signing. So this is what we understand as our territory. As you can see that we have over half, within the 5-state region is our territory, and probably half of Nebraska. These are the waterways and aquifers within our treaty boundaries. We feel that that's why we have authority over the treaty boundaries, and this was one of the considerations in this grant, and I hope to develop our enhanced capabilities to monitor the climate with our grant over the treaty territories. Next slide. And this is the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. As you can see at the bottom there, you see a straight line. They cut off our treaty territory boundaries there, and another treaty was signed later on that gave away Lakota territory. That could be disputed. So those are our areas. Here's the just a photo from the internet I got from the Oglala aquifer. Next. And we're very concerned about what's going on in our most sacred area. All of our land is sacred, but we're here. This is the Black Hills of South Dakota. And we have all of these mines We have some gold exploration going on. We have some gold mining going on. There's some uranium mines. And there's also, that's probably not listed in here, are oil and gas projects. These are all treaty violations that are happening in the state of South Dakota, in collusion with the United States, are allowing all this to happen. So our climate is our biggest, one of our biggest concerns in areas that we're going to be working on. Next, here you go. This Paula.
Paula, could you unmute, please? Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I just want to thank everybody, and Phil referred to some of these treaty violations, and you know, throughout these whole territories and in the treaties, we also have identified hunting and fishing areas and rights within them areas and within them boundaries. And throughout our history, our tribes have cared for and provided territorial, we took care of the territory, we took care of the land, so it provided back for us. So that's one of the reasons, we try to, maintain and preserve the fact that we're protectors and caretakers of the land. But I'm sorry, I just didn't introduce myself. Chante Washte Yuha no Pechi Yuzapi. My name is Paula Antoinez. I was introduced earlier, but in our visioning of addressing the climate change, in some of our first meetings, we decided that it was just not climate change, but a climate crisis. So when we did start talking about our group, we decided to name ourselves the Sicangu Climate Crisis Working Group, because it is a crisis. There's things happening around the world that we can address individually, but it is a crisis and we need to start addressing it immediately. So there were several avenues of outreach and how we reached out to the communities and gathered input, comments, and suggestions from the communities. And four of the most predominant ways were community meetings, community survey, tribal government interviews, and outreach to the different tribal government and the tribal departments within the tribe, the Rosebud Sioux tribe. We also did elder interviews. Do you want to go on to the next slide, please? And I can't see it. Let me see if I can see the slides. Okay, there we go. And this is one of the ways that we did a lot of the meetings virtually, because like Robin had said, it was during COVID. So there was, it was pretty new to a lot of our people in the communities to have virtual meetings. A lot of people weren't used to virtual meetings. It was kind of a new thing, for some of our people, and to communicate online, but it was challenging. But we did get a lot of good input and participation from many of the different communities. We had communities, we had tribal members, we had non-tribal members, we had people who lived in the communities and lived on and near the reservation. And that's kind of how we did that. And some of our concerns that we came up with, the most predominant concern was drought. At the time, there were a lot of issues. There was a lot of issues and surrounding the drought. And our second one was the extreme heat, which contributes to the drought. And then there were a lot of severe storms, both in the winter and in the summer. We also do have tornadoes and other severe weather events. We'd also experienced wildfires. Several years ago, we did have a wildfire that claimed 46,000 acres of our timbered area. And to combat that, there were several things that were done, including planting thousands and thousands of trees. And we have bigger snow and ice storms, more flooding, and what we plan to focus on. You know, our main focus is going to be water quality and availability. You know, ensuring that our people have the appropriate amount of water. You know, our second one was our people's health. You know, that drought affects everything. The drought affects our ability to gather our traditional foods and medicines, which also affect our people's health. So that was another thing. Then that brings us to our next focus, which would be our culturally significant plants and animals and places. We have energy sources, wildfires, agriculture, plants and wildlife in general, but our main thing is our people's health. Next slide, please. And we reached out to our tribal government, our department heads, and there were 13 of them, and you can see here they were, you know, they were the directors of them programs. We reached out for the water, ranch, my office, the land office, elders. We were concerned about the elders, forestry, our environmental departments, our enrollment departments, which, you know, there is a factor that affects our tribal membership, our tribal historic preservation, and of course, our emergency response, our economic development corporation, our utilities, and of course, our health departments. Next slide, please. And so from that, we've come with some recommendations, and the most prominent ideas that came out of all our surveys and reaching out to the tribal governments was our willing and our desire to protect our Oyate, to protect the people, protect and wisely use our water, the water we have. As you know, we live, some of our lands are on the Oglala Aquifer, and we have several waterways and rivers, lakes and streams on our reservation, protecting the land and all our living relatives, including the animal life and all plants, and, you know, whether it be domesticated or wildlife. Next slide, please. And here are four of our highlighted recommendations. And these weren't in any particular order, but they are the most, what we thought was most important. And we wanted to establish a permanent tribal office dealing with climate crisis, led by a chief climate officer. Plan and build capacity to address human needs in weather emergencies. Implement our Rosebud Drought Adaptation and Mitigation Plan. And we wanted to establish a Sicangu Lakota Oyate Environmental Data Decision Center, focusing on information and sovereignty for land and our living relatives, including our data sovereignty as well. Next slide, please. In protecting the Oyate, some of our goals. We're going to establish a permanent tribal department and Oyate Climate Adaptation leader, a climate leader. We're going to enhance tribal capacity to protect life and property among the Sicangu Lakota Oyate by planning for extreme weather events, establishing a local warning system, developing and planning and ensuring reliable heating and cooling. By doing that with community centers that provide warming and cooling centers, because we do have extreme heats. You know, just in the past couple of months, we've had heat fluctuations of 70 degrees. So we know it's either going to be really cold or really hot. We're going to have wellness checks, especially on our young families with children and our elders. Consider rooftop solar and higher building codes. Next slide, please. Protecting and using our water. RST has legal access to the Missouri River. We sit on the major aquifer, the Oglala Aquifer, but we are currently awaiting for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to support and approve our tribal water code. And that's one of the things just recently with Deb Highland at the Department of Interior, she had lifted the water code moratorium. So that was one of the things that we jumped right on. And that was through Syed Huck of our Water Resources Department. And he is also a very active member of our working group. We wanted to fully implement the Rosebud Sioux Adaptation and Mitigation Plan and expand characterization and monitoring of our Rosebud water. And that's including any of the streams, waterways, you know, our ponds and our lakes. Next slide, please. Okay, protecting the land and our living relatives. Establish the Sicangu Climate Center for focused information and sovereignty for the land and our living relatives. Yes, groundwater too. And, you know, one of the things that our goal has also been is to normalize, you know, we want to normalize climate change, you know, the vocabulary, addressing a climate change, because sometimes when people hear the word climate change or climate crisis, you know, it has become a topic of conversation to normalize that. Any of our conversations is of our nether goals. So get used to climate change.
Paula, I'm sorry, we're
And to-
having trouble hearing you. Maybe if you want to turn off your video, that might help.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
How's that?
Yep. Yes, it's definitely better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, okay. And normalization of the conversation of climate adaptation, climate mitigation, climate crisis, you know. Some of the things we plan to do are cleaning up our reservation, expanding food sovereignty, local markets, processing facilities, promoting habitat conservations, reduction of overgrazing through various avenues, including reduction of AUMs, understand the impacts of climate change on our forests and grasslands, and what that impacts mean to both wildlife and other animals. Planting more trees, which our forestry department has been doing at this time, actually for a couple of years now. So we're really kind of stoked about the new trees that are going to come up in our forested areas. Track forage production and use, preserve our sacred plants and at-risk species, and consider when development occurs. And also, you know, we're projecting doing plants, you know, plant studies and and that sort of thing. And so with that, I'll go ahead and let Robin start to discuss our climate center.
Okay, thank you, Paula, and thank you, Phil, again. So last couple slides, you mentioned, you heard mention of a Sicangu Climate Center. And after the plan that we just described was completed, which was a requirement to apply for this round of BIA funding, we put together a proposal to actually implement a data center for the tribes where they could own and have control over the information that a nation needs to manage its resources. So we have the initial pieces of this. And once again, so, and it is directly coming out of the climate change work, the climate crisis working group. And again, data are going to be really important as this project moves, as any of these projects move forward. We've got to have a much better handle on the components of what's on the reservation and how it's changing. Oh, that's the wrong direction. Sorry. So this has been things about information are woven through the plan like this, that characterization. There are parts of the reservation where there are no data on the groundwater flow, and there are contamination sources and things like that. So putting the tribe's arms around that kind of information is the goal of this center. And we're working with a relatively high-tech firm that can provide the tribe with the kind of information security that it needs. It has to be able to decide who has access to data, who is allowed to touch it, who's changing it. All those kinds of things are going to be built into the information platform that we're designing the center around. But partnerships such as with CU Boulder, so there's funding within the award for a training program so that we can bring more folks on the reservation up to speed in terms of using statistics, using data, using the technology that we'll have available. So we're hoping to take the center and use it as a tool to bring the 7 council fires of the Oyate back together and work with the tribes across the northern Great Plains, because they have been separated into separate groups, but in history they are, as you saw, a single group. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin, and Phil and Paula. So I guess we'll open to Q&A. I'll just stop the sharing mode. So I'm making sure that all of you can unmute and ask the questions directly to our speakers. So I'm just doing that. So if feel free to unmute and turn on your video. I think you should be able to do that. And while we're doing that, during registration, there were a few questions, a couple of questions, and they were kind of related. And the questions were around, is the tribe coordinating with other folks, other agencies, like the federal agencies, Park Service, for example, or the state in thinking about the whole adaptation plan, but also going further with the center?
Well, let me take a shot at that. We're certainly going to be collaborating with the agencies. It's federal agencies and state agencies are the source of a lot of the core data that one would need to build a management program like this. But as I said, the intent is to work across tribes. This isn't designed for just the Sicangu Lakota, but to create connections. So I'll stop there.
Bill, Paula, do you have any further thoughts on working with other partners in the region?
Yeah, you know, over the past year or so, maybe Phil can kind of fill us in a little bit more, but we have reached out and to other members of the Oyate Shakoi and shared our plan with them as well, because you know, as being part of a nation, and you know, we always strive to be good relatives. You know, that's our goal in life, be a good relative, you know. So we've reached out and shared our plans with the other members of the Oyate Shakoi through several meetings that Phil has had, and, you know, individual discussions, and through not only the treaty council meetings, but also through the IRA, you know, because the tribal governments are in an organizational structure of the IRA, and maybe Phil can explain that a little bit more, but yeah.
It's important to remember that treaties were signed with the United States government on a nation-to-nation basis. So we would like to work with universities and other organizations, but as far as the state government, I haven't looked into that too much, because our relationship is with the United States government. And so all the tribes of the Oyate Shakoi, the 7 council fires, are waiting for us to get this project off the ground, and they're very anxious to see what we're putting together, because most of the tribes within our region, the Great Plains region, I don't believe they have the climate adaptation plans ready yet. So we're kind of taking the lead on this, and we'll be, accessing public sources for data and tribal data, and probably federal government, working with federal agencies to secure what we need. So it's going to be a pretty a state-of-the-art platform that we're going to be, where our tribal leaders will have possibly a dashboard that they'll be able to see information that they'll be able to make good decisions for our people going forward. Because one of the concerns we have is the uranium mining that's to the west of us. You have Crow Butte uranium mine, and also the Dewey Burdock uranium mines. So we want to launch some of these sensors into the waterways and into the ground. We want to be able to monitor the soil, the water, the air, the climate. So it's going to be pretty exciting, and that's where we're heading to with this project. And we want to be able to eventually help our other sister tribes.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. You're also free to put it in the chat box. I see a question just appeared in the chat box. Are you considering restoration protection of beavers as a component of your climate adaptation work, since their ecosystem services include storing and purifying fresh water, reducing wildfire risk, and reducing the effects of severe stormwater discharge? So it's about beavers.
Something to remember is that in our Lakota philosophy is we are part of the land. We are part of that ecosystem. And one of the things that's going to possibly come out of this is the four-legged relatives, the Buffalo Nation. We're discussing increasing the bison herds, and we have to find ways to make sure we protect these ecosystems and work with our relatives. We consider them our relatives, the beavers and different four-legged animals and the creatures that are living in the ground. We call them Wamankashka. So it's very cultural. It goes along with our Lakota philosophy. And as far as the mining, we will be able to have our own scientific data that someday if we need to testify in Congress or anywhere, we're going to be able to have all this information to finally stand on. We have, stories, oral history and things like that. But when we go into the Western world, they want to see evidence, scientific evidence and things like that. So we're stepping into that area also.
And I just want to say that part of our tribal departments are departments like our game fish and parks. They do have habitat and not only restorative habitat, but habitat areas for preservation of many different animals, even including our prairie dogs. At one time, so a lot of people think they're pests, but a long time ago, we revered them because they saved our nation. They saved from starvation after all the buffalo were slaughtered. There was a point when, one of the termination policies of the federal government was to remove our food source, and that was our buffalo. So that's one of our practices, now that's why, as Phil said, we're trying to restore and build our herds, and we're kind of lucky because I just read, through one of the Department of Interior's announcements just today that they're offering like millions of dollars for restorative efforts, on behalf of the tribes. And, the Black Hills, there are a lot of uranium project, there are a lot of open uranium mines that are still existing. And, a lot of them uranium companies are no longer companies, so it's up to landowners, it's up to the federal government to work on mitigating them open mines. That's another thing that needs to be worked on. And through other efforts with different organizations such as the Black Hills Water Alliance, I see Dakota Rural Action on there, same thing. There's many different environmental and protective or nonprofit organizations throughout the state that we combine efforts with to try to combat through different legislative activities, such as, responding to comments at the federal level, attending legislative committee sessions at the state level. We do have to voice our concern, even though we specifically focus on nation to nation, we still have to say no. We don't want this in our homelands. We don't want this in our most sacred areas, the Black Hills, because, our creation stories, they come from the Black Hills. At one time we considered the Black Hills so sacred, no one lived there, and now it's like one of the major population hubs of South Dakota. And also I just seen that 1872 reform, I did submit comments on that as well at one time, but there are a lot of efforts that are happening, through the mining. The whole Black Hills is a mining claim right at the moment.
Yep.
There's mining claims over 90% Yeah.
So right now the Sicangu, our tribe is working on asking the president to exclude the Black Hills from the 1872 Mining Act. So while we're doing that, we're building up our evidence. Also remember there's oil and gas projects in North Dakota that could affect our regional area. So we better get ready, get this project ready to monitor the methane that they're releasing into the air just north of us. So the Great Plains area is in jeopardy in my mind.
And I want to emphasize something that Phil said a bit ago. The center is intended to give the tribes the capacity to walk in the door with bulletproof data and to give them comprehensive information about the resources that they're worried about. And Paula mentioned that the water code is going to be potentially be implemented. That would allow the tribe to regulate the use of water on their land, which they're not able to do now. And if anybody has worked in regulatory processes, you know that if you tell somebody they can't do something, you better have really good data to back it up. So we're trying to build the infrastructure to enable the tribe to be able to take steps like regulating non-Indian water users on their reservation, for which they really need court quality data.
Yeah, and to add on to that, with not only with what's going into the air, we're also concerned about with what's going underneath. With the carbon capture, pipelines that are being considered. There's also even a water pipeline being considered from the Missouri River to the Black Hills as well. So there's a lot of things that, we need to have sound data to back us up, on what's happening, and to even use that to help, gain partnerships and collaborations with our other members of the Oyate Shakoi, so we have more power in numbers, because all of that data, is from our entire region. We have a lot of power. We have more power when we stand together. Okay.
There's a question about mining. If tribes would do any of their own mining. That's something that we've never talked about. So I don't think that we'll ever mine our Black Hills ourselves. I know there's a demand for lithium and uranium. It's hard for me to picture us mining for ourselves.
And like I said before, we consider the Black Hills so sacred that, to me, that would just be abomination to even consider that, because it's just so sacred. I just don't ever see that in the future.
We're coming around towards the end of the hour, and I had something I wanted to say about the plan itself. And Phil noted that the Sicangu are one of the first in the region to do a formal plan. But in reality, the plan that we developed is actually pretty simple. It's got a lot of pieces to it, but it's take care of your people. And we saw this winter that climate will kill people. It's take care of your water. Without water, you don't exist. And people have come for resources of the tribes before and taken them away. So they need to be watchful on that. And the land that you live on. The land that you live on is going to change, and taking care of that and understanding it. And those three priorities those three priorities for me could apply to any tribe or any community, frankly. Again, it doesn't have to be as hard. It doesn't have to be hard. We know what's coming, and there are resources around that tell folks that. But the people, the water, and the land, that's pretty basic. Thank you.
Greg, please go ahead. Ask your question. We can't hear you for some reason. Greg, sorry, we cannot hear you. No. If you would like to type your question, yeah, I'm sorry you're having all these problems, technical problems today. So I'll be wait for Greg to type his question. Is there any other question that folks want to ask? Okay, comment. Maybe I'll just put in one question. I saw drought as one of the big concern, but Robin also showed that the region has seen more precipitation coming in. So I was just curious why drought was the bigger concern in the region.
I'll answer that. For a couple of years, we were in a drought situation. We had, the counties around us were designated as drought, and I'm not sure why we were not. Because we were experiencing the same amount of drought and impacts to our land, to our wildlife, and to our vegetation. So but recently we had I'm not sure how many feet of snow, but I huge snow drift in my yard, and so there was a lot of snow, and we were on that verge. I think there was a designation, drought designation, where you had to be at a certain level for a period of time, and we were on the verge of that. And then we would get some type of participation, but hopefully that we will come out of that with some continued participation, so we can get some more of our traditional plants and other crops to do better this year. So
it's also been a pattern.
To add to that was Robin, even though around us they were saying that there was drought for the Rosebud tribal lands, there was no drought being reported. So this system would help us exert or assert our sovereignty to tell the world that, look, we do have drought here. The cattle are starving. The grass, there's fewer grass. The horses are starving. So we know that there's drought in our area, even though we got 34 inches of snow, and then a week later we got 18 inches of snow. That didn't help us, with our wildlife and our animals.
It's also a phenomenon across the Great Plains that's emerging, is rainy winters, rainy springs, but turn around pretty rapidly into very hot and dry summers. And by the end of the summer period, you can have lost all the effect of that rainy spring.
Yeah, extremes are the norm. Climate extremes. I think northern plains are like California, experiencing these whiplash, or more vulnerable to these. So with that, I see we are up on the hour at the point, and I'll conclude these webinars. Just like to thank our speakers again, and if you'd like to thank them, you can use the reaction button and thank our speakers. And at this point, I'll stop the recording and we'll get to a more informal conversation for next 10-15 minutes. If you'd like to join, please do that. And thank you again for joining, and we'll see you next time.